Hey, what's up? It's Kit. Time for another video. Today we're going to talk about jig heads. And now, first and foremost, for you guys that are in a hurry, the first 5 minutes is going to be for you because I'm just going to explain exactly what you need to know, and I'm not going to do a deep dive. For those that'll stay, we'll get a bit more tips and a bit more explanation on which ones, and plus I'm also going to talk about some specialized jig heads. Okay, so there are two sets here. There's this in this box, and then there's this. Now, these are all for my shore fishing applications, and this is for offshore. The biggest difference being the hook gauge. So these guys are thick wire gauge hooks, and you kind of need them for bigger fish, whereas you'll find that there are some very light gauge hooks on this in this box right here. So I'm going to talk about this in a future video. I'm going to take this out. I just wanted to show you that for ultralight, it's not restricted to the shoreline. So these hooks, aside for probably one or, well, about three, are all in this selection right here. Okay, so we're going to talk about these. First and foremost, there's bullet heads and there are round jig heads. Now, if you're in a hurry, okay, and if you have to choose between the two, zoom in here so that you can see better. So if you have a choice between the two and you want to choose only one, choose the round head. Okay, they're a bit more versatile when it comes to these things. For fast presentations, you want a bullet head. For slower presentations, you want a round head. Okay, so for those that have a curl on their tail or a knob or something in the tail that gives the tail some action, what you want is a round head. If you want a faster presentation, you can use a bullet head. So you can interchange them. That it's totally up to you. If you want a longer sink rate, you use a round head. That's it. When you're fishing soft plastics, be very, very mindful of the hook gap size, okay? Because what you don't want to do is bury that really close to the body, and that will affect your hook up ratio. The more exposed the hook is, the more you will hook up. Now, the thing about gaps, hook gaps also, is that the bigger the hook gap, the more holding power it has on the fish. Okay, so while you're choosing jig heads, always be mindful of not only the size of your soft plastic, but also the size of the gap. Now, again, that these two will have better holding than this one right here. Okay, because again, the more exposed the point is, the more you'll hook up. If you're faced with something like this, with a collar that's thick and you're using soft plastics like this, what you do is get a pair of pliers, clamp down just at the back of the head, and try to take that off, okay? Because these jig heads will not do your soft plastic any good. If you want your soft plastic to stay, and if you're using a jig head without a retainer, super glue is your answer. Okay? It'll make it tough, it'll make the connection tough, and don't put too much. You put a drop, push it in, and it'll stay. Okay? So that's about it. I think with those tips you'll enjoy soft plastics fishing, ultralight soft plastic fishing already. So if you want to stay around, I'll discuss a few more things if you have time. So let's have these 4 as an example. Okay. There are times where you want a bigger hook on small soft plastics such as this, but be mindful of the weight. Okay, the more weight you have, the bigger the splash will be, and when you're fishing really shallow waters, it spooks the fish. So as a general rule, the shallower you go, the lighter your jig head, and only use as much weight as it takes for your soft plastic to go down to the bottom. If you use bigger weight in shallow water, you'll tend to spook more fish than catch them. Okay? There are several instances where I use a bare hook. And this is a very good example. It's kind of hard to find, but this is a size 6. And even on tiny soft plastics, such as this bulky ring, it's just the right size. It'll make it difficult to cast, but in very shallow water, especially if there's big fish. Now, a big fish in shallow water scares easy. They're very, very spooked. And there are instances where this will give you the most advantage because when you cast out, lands in the water, it hardly makes a splash. And you can have it sit there. And when the big fish comes, you just actually kind of just pop the top or the tip of your rod tip and it'll kind of make it jump. But also, if it has some weight, what happens, it'll go up and down real fast. But on a weightless hook, it tends to glide and it looks a bit more natural. Okay? So there are times where you would need just a bare hook and it will work better. The disadvantage, of course, is the fact that it's not easy to cast. So it's not a distance presentation lure. It's more of a precise and a super finesse presentation. And if you can have the wind behind you to help you with the cast, it'll work out better for you. So that's the bare hook. In sandy areas, I like to use bullets more than round heads because the round heads will tend to dig into the sand. And when you drag them, they create more sound and disturbance and it spooks the fish more. So following what I've said earlier about presenting only as much weight to get you to the bottom, okay, we have this example of a bullet head and you can't really see the profile, but it's kind of diamond shaped. And when you're dragging this on the bottom, there's a rib here. Okay, there's a rib here that runs in the middle. And what happens here is that if you're reeling this in slowly, you can't reel very fast in very shallow water. Okay, so when and it's in not even inches, it's like millimeters at a time to avoid spooking the fish. So when you're reeling this in, it actually creates a very faint, tiny line. And the disturbance that causes either gets the attention of the fish or it spooks it. So I like bullet heads because they leave a smaller imprint than a round head. Most times when I use a round head and I reel even slowly, because of the sound it makes, it tends to spook the fish. So I favor the bullet heads in that situation. Also, be mindful of colors of the hooks. I mean, this is a silver one. This one's gray. And I gravitate towards As you can see here, you can see that most of the hooks that I use are actually dark colored. Okay, even this one. And the reason being is that even a slight glint could potentially spook the fish. And it has happened a few times, or a lot of times actually, before I kind of learned that even the hooks, the color of the hooks spook the fish. So be mindful. I mean, I have this for, a reason, because there's really no way for me to find a round head of this size with a black hook. What you can do is get a Sharpie and actually color the hooks so that it's black. And if you subscribe to the same thought process, it will actually make you feel better that the exposed hook is not of a dark color. Now, remember that while you're fishing this, there's only a couple of places that will be exposed. It will be the tip, the back, part of the back, and also your tie-in point. So just to take off the shine that would potentially spook the fish, you could use a marker and it's good to go. Okay? Now, when you're fishing in really shallow water, I mean, when I say really shallow water, I'm probably that shallow right there. Okay, 5 to 3 inches. There's some really big fish sometimes that actually swim in shallow waters like that. We have grunter, we have brim, we have flatheads, very good target fish, and sometimes even queenfish go that shallow, but they tend to spook more. Okay, so having these helps you actually get a good shot at them. Okay, now you'll notice that I have these right here. Okay, now with these ones, you can see that they have a sort of like a worm hook here. And what this gives me is actually a way for me to fish weedy areas almost snag proof. I say almost because they still tend to get hung up. Now, the difference between a bullet head and a round ball head going through the weeds is that a bullet head would most likely be a bit more snag proof than a round head. They weigh about the same. Okay, the only difference is that one is a bit more snagless than the other. You'll see that there's a difference in the gauge of the hook there. And I tend to use the round head if there are some bigger fish present. But the thing about the round head, and I fish this exclusively when I'm fishing drops. And when I'm fishing drops, the round head gives me a bit slower, a bit of a slower presentation. And since I'm using most of these round heads for lures that require an even slower presentation, which means that I'm close to the bottom, or I have bottom contact a lot while I'm working it. It gives me a bit of an insurance that I won't get hung up. This is a big one. I have a bunch of the small ones. Now, couldn't find them though. But these are specific flats fishing heads. These are called wiggle heads. I don't know where you can buy them because I made these. I have a mold that makes these, and I have them in a bunch of sizes, even some big ones. But there's a really tiny one, and I use this when I'm fishing all sand. What it does is actually when you move it, it wiggles. When you're reeling, it wiggles, and it works. This gives me an even slower presentation and a very good fall when I'm fishing in waters that are deeper than 5 inches. And what it does is actually give you a bit of a delay when you're hitting bottom. In some instances, especially when you're hopping, these are very effective and quite effective when the fish are very active. This particular one, as mentioned earlier, I use them almost exclusively offshore, but there are some instances where I use them inshore because, especially when there's fish present like biggish grouper, you'll need the hook strength to pull them out of the structure they live in. Now, this was very difficult to find, and I use this exclusively on these fish bodies, or ones with a paddle tail. Almost too specialist, but what it gives me is a great fluttering, especially when I'm fishing around rocks and where there's fish like trevallies, and queens. And what it does is give me, as opposed to just the action from the tail, it gives me a bit of a flutter on the way down. And sometimes you'll catch, or most times actually, you'll catch fish while it's going down. Now, the thing about this is that it makes the lure not only flutter down, but also slide a bit forward. And when fish are kind of very picky about things, that kind of action, because it's very subtle and you don't reel, it does it on its own. It kind of just goes forward, and that's because of there's some planing surfaces on this one. It's very subtle, but it's a change of direction. As soon as it lands, instead of going straight down, what it does is give you kind of like a slow diagonal action, and they love it. Especially when the fishing is hard, you have to have like a few tricks up your sleeve, and this is certainly one of them for me. This is a size 8. Now, if you compare that to, say, a size 6 right here, you can see that there's a pretty big difference. And the bonus, of course, is that I can fish this around structure and weeds without without the risk of hanging up. All right, so in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. And I really hope this helps you, because these are quite useful for a lot of people out there who are kind of confused when they go into the shop and then they see all these kinds of jig heads and they get confused. And they end up walking out of the shop because they don't know what to get. So it's not rocket science. With a bit of an understanding, they work great. All right. So if this video has been useful to you, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. I make videos that explain a lot of things. I haven't started my fishing videos yet. But when I do start my fishing video and I'm using this particular technique, what I'll do is link that fishing video with this tutorial so that you'd be able to understand what I'm doing. And also for me to actually not explain anymore what I'm doing while I'm fishing. So that way I could just link that this is the technique that I'm using. These are the lures. These are the jig heads, whatever. All right, so again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.